Hey guys, welcome back to Thriving in Love podcast, the podcast that challenges status quo so couples can thrive as their authentic selves. Today on the show, we have Tilley. She is a lawyer by trade, but also the founder of The Arrow, which is a brand new platform for people to connect their single friends with people that are looking for partners. And she'll go more into that on her own. And she's also an incredible content creator that spreads an empowering message for women to not settle for less than what you want and what you desire. And Eve, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I am so excited to dive into The Arrow, but before we go into that, can we talk a little bit about how you became this spokesperson for dating on the internet?
So I think like 2 or 3 years ago, it was during COVID. I was talking to my roommate at the time, and she was just talking about kind of her journey. She was a year or two older than me, and she was freezing her eggs. And we were both on the apps going on, 3 dates a week sometimes, trying to meet people in, the gym, anywhere we could. And with COVID kind of hitting, it became apparent that norms were changing in the dating culture, that people were kind of relying on the apps and weren't putting themselves out there as much, specifically because they weren't able to because of the pandemic, but also just like it became this kind of crutch. And I wasn't feeling like I was getting approached in public. I wasn't feeling like people were receptive to it. And I just kind of started talking about it on TikTok as a like, what do you do if you're in your 30s, you want to meet somebody, you're a little bit burnout on the apps. Everybody says they know somebody, nobody really knows where. And I just kind of like very openly started talking about it. Got a lot of criticism and hate, but also had an enormous amount of women come forward and be like, I feel the exact same way. What do we do? And kind of just kept going and realized that there was a community of us who were all burnt out, wanting the same things, didn't know how to get there, didn't know what to do.
I feel like it resonates a lot with a lot of people because everybody has a problem, but nobody knows the solution to the problem. Because right now, everyone's like, oh, just like keep at it, keep swiping, you'll find
Right.
your person. And it's like, is that really working? Because I don't think that that is the answer. And I would love to hear your thoughts on like, do you still use dating apps? What are your thoughts on dating apps?
So I still have them. And I think I'm a big believer that you can't just approach a problem from like one direction. Like if you were training for a marathon, you wouldn't just go out and run. Like you would also look at your sleep, you would look at your nutrition, you would look at like the muscle groups that build to be able to be a better runner. You would look at your endurance, your mental capacity to do this, right? If you're applying for a new job, you don't just upload your resume. You also network, you talk to your friends. Like you have to approach it from a multifaceted place. And I think of the dating apps as similar to just like updating your resume. It's step one. But beyond the dating apps, you have to, and I saw this really cool podcast from another guy who talks about dating a lot. I think his name's Matthew Hussey. And he was basically saying like all the things that you have to do to find love without actually just going out and dating. And a lot of them had to do with like make new friends, join new activities, join new hobbies, make your living space open and available for more than one person, make it so that you're inviting to having another person into that space. And so I've tried to kind of come at it from all angles while still using the dating apps because I do think there's a place and a purpose for them.
I love everything that you just said. And it's kind of like an energetic thing that you're doing as well when you're creating that space in your home
Yeah.
and when you are doing that prep work and to let the universe know that, like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm ready for this. And that's how you attract, right? Instead of going at it
Yeah.
with this eagerness and anxiety and this like chase energy, to really tapping into that like feminine where you are like, hey, I'm doing what I can so the
Right.
universe can meet me like halfway.
It's hard though because you're constantly balancing, and I still struggle with this. You'll match with someone on a dating app who on paper looks perfect. And it's so easy to get caught up in the can't wait to go on that date. Like, this is the one. I found him. And then they don't respond. Or you go on a first date and you never hear from them again. Or they don't match what their profile shows. Or they're not as into you as you are into them. And you've created this whole story and gotten so excited because you have been anxiously waiting that it has been a big lesson for me in the past year or two to just kind of let things unfold and not get overly excited before you even know the person. You don't know a person on date one, much less even a month, 2 months in. So that's been my big lesson in the past 2 years.
No, I love that you say that too, because something I've noticed in a lot of the clients that I coach with women, they have this like women are very visionary creatures, and I think that we love to look at best case scenarios
Yeah,
before going into something. And then I feel like that does lead to disappointment because the reality is never going to match up to this like fantasy. A lot of the research that I've found is that when it comes to intimacy, women need that emotional connection and men need
sure.
obviously that like visual physical connection. Women need the heart, the emotional connection. So it's funny because it really does go hand in hand in the dating world when you're first meeting someone, and you swipe because you're attracted to them physically, but then they don't go deeper than that emotionally on the date, and
Right.
you're just like, what, that's it, like you're really just that shallow.
Right, right. And it's true because it's like I find that for me, I don't enjoy intimacy or sex if I've not gotten to that place emotionally with somebody. I mean, it's not fulfilling for me. I don't wake up the next morning feeling like satisfied or being excited about what happened. I just kind of feel like, oh, a physical act occurred. And I feel like there's such a disconnect between men and women in that plane, even in our 30s. Like in your 20s, I felt like it was more accepted, people got it. But like in our 30s, you would think men would understand that piece a little bit clearer.
And I think it's definitely starting. And I think it helps
Sure.
with people like you that are creating the content and we're speaking our truth. We're understanding ourselves deeper, first and
Yeah.
foremost. Let's just start there as a women. Like, we finally feel like we're allowed to like question what Cosmo has told us our whole life.
Do people still read Cosmo? Like, is that still a magazine? Because I feel like I grew up on Cosmo.
Literally. And it's always like, oh, how to get the man to want you,
Right,
how to like please your man, and like all these things about like blowjobs and stuff. And it's like, what about women? Like, we've never
right.
been allowed to think about what we want. And I've actually been having interesting conversations with men about this as well, because they said that the whole industry is actually anti positive sexuality for men too. And men don't feel like they
Interesting.
can like completely indulge in their desires to have a deeper
Sure,
connection, you know? So anyway, we're not going to go
sure.
into that. But what we do want to go into is the growing trend of this lonely men epidemic and the rise of women thriving as single women in their 40s, 50s, like 60s. Like, so what are your thoughts on that?
I think that unfortunately, I think everyone's lonely. I think men and women. I think it's a big result of the pandemic because I think prior to the pandemic, it was a lot easier to meet people in person or just people were more comfortable with it, right? And thinking back into like kind of what happened, the apps came into being, say, 2012 to 2015, right? But still, right before the pandemic, it was awkward for you to say you met someone on the apps. I only feel like in the past, like 4 years, people have been like, oh, yeah, I met him on Hinge. And that's a totally acceptable thing to say. They're not like making up where they met him, right? So the apps have kind of shifted that. And I think the pandemic has shifted that. But what I think has happened with the apps becoming and taking such a forefront in the dating culture, men are constantly consumed by this grass is always greener complex. Because they're such visual creatures, they're going to swipe on a girl, want to take her on a date. 3 swipes later, they're going to get a hotter girl. And then it's never enough. There's never a satisfaction. So they never fully kind of engage or have any accountability to the dating world because there's always a hotter, prettier girl they could swipe on. And I think that they're kind of fulfilling or creating their own problem in that if they're always looking for the better, hotter version, then they're never satisfied with what they have, and they're going to push women away, ghost them, what have you, because there's no accountability there. And I think that that's contributing to it, that they're disappointed because the better, hotter girl doesn't want to go on the date with them. And then they feel back to square one. And something similar is happening with women, probably in a different way. We're very jaded. And so if a guy doesn't immediately make a reservation and a plan, if he's kind of like, well, maybe sometime next week, we're like, no, we must have a date and a time and a place because we've gotten so jaded that we're like, we don't want to waste our time on some guy who's just going to ghost us. So we've both increased our expectations because of the apps and like our own societal jadedness, that both of us are expecting things that just aren't happening and aren't realistic.
Yeah. What do you think the solution is there?
Ooh, I should take a dose of my own medicine. I think the solution is because I do it too. I think the solution is to go out on dates with people that you're not initially attracted to. Go out on dates with people that you don't necessarily know if they check off all the boxes. Learn how to date. I don't think we know how to date anymore. We put so much kind of pressure on it, and it should be a lot more fun, a lot more easygoing, a lot more natural. And we've got so much buildup and so much expectation. And it's like, just make dating something that is enjoyable again. And it's easier said than done, right? Because I always want every date to transition into my future person, right? But it's not reasonable. It's not realistic. And I should take a step
My
back
husband
and
and I were casually dating for 8 months before he even called me his girlfriend, you know?
yeah.
And
And I think
so
that's
much of
good.
that was scary, of
Hmm.
course, where I was just like, every 3 months, I'm like, what are we? Where is this going? And he was like, oh, I don't know. We'll see what happens. And there were so many times where I cut him off because I was just like, no, if
Right.
I'm not going to get what I want, I'm not going to entertain this relationship. And then I would sit and like really think about it. And I'm just like, do I really want to miss out on getting to know this person deeper because of a label? Just so
Right.
that I can let society know that I'm off
I've
the
got someone.
market,
Yeah.
literally? Or do I just want to take it a day at a time and see where it goes? I saw one of your videos that resonated so deeply with me where it was like, what is this? What are 6 months? What's a year? If you're
Yeah.
really looking for a life partner for 50 plus years, like why rush into it just for a label?
Well, and I think that is something that I keep coming back to, and that's been a recent lesson for me is if he's my forever person, or even my I'm married for 20 years person, right? What's the difference between us becoming girlfriend and boyfriend today and in 4 months? Like, what is the end goal?
All that time is doing is giving you more time to get to know this person and
Yeah.
decide for yourself if
No.
this is
And
really someone
clarity.
that you want to commit with. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like
It's
see if you guys are actually compatible or not, or is it just the honeymoon stage?
right. Well, and this has been my huge shift probably in the past year or two is realizing that you can want commitment, but that doesn't mean you have to race for it. And I think so. I recently started, well, not recently, in July, I started kind of seeing a guy right about the same time that all these videos about me wanting a husband went viral. And he said to me, he said, I thought you were going to be so adamantly trying to lock this down in like the first 2 weeks. And he was like, I've been completely surprised by how laid back about this you are. And I was like, I can really want a husband as like the end goal and also be really cautious and careful and open minded at the same time. And those two things don't have to compete. Just because I want a husband doesn't mean I would marry anybody. Doesn't, you know what I mean? Like,
A
I can
hundred
know what I
percent.
want.
And like, can we actually go deeper into that? Like,
Sure.
how do you not let the anxiety of wanting a husband get in the way during the dating process of getting to know someone?
Hard. It's really difficult because I think that every time, so with him, we recently, probably about a month ago, I was like, I need to take a step back and we need to kind of regroup as friends. We need to have a baseline level of friendship that I didn't think we had yet. And so we're kind of rebuilding that. But I think checking in with yourself and like trying not to confuse anxiety with butterflies, because I would get anxiety on dates because I wanted it to be my husband so badly. And I would confuse that with he's the one. I wouldn't be feeling this anxious if it wasn't about him, right? And the reality is, I just have anxiety. And I needed to get a grip on that and not treat it as like some, infatuation or some like amazing feeling for this guy. So that was part of it. Also, I think I really strove to continue dating or at least continue talking to other men the entire time. Because until at which point we have a conversation, which we hadn't, then I'm doing myself a disservice by not giving myself perspective on the situation. And that doesn't mean you're like sleeping around necessarily, or maybe you are, but I was actively still talking to people on dating apps, actively going out and talking to people because it gave me perspective on what he brought to the table and what I liked or didn't like about him.
And it helps with attachment, right? Like, I
Yes.
think that if you have an anxious attachment style and you know that about yourself, I think it's important to date multiple people at the same time so that you're
Yeah.
not putting all your eggs in one basket and getting too attached. if you do have an avoidant attachment style, then you probably should be very open and honest about that with everyone that you're talking to.
Communication is a great thing. We should all get a lot better at it.
It's like, why are we not
Just
taught
explain
communication?
yourself. I know. Well, it's like we get geometry lessons, but no one talk to us about like negotiation, communication, expressing your feelings.
Oh my gosh. If we did, we would all be such amazing human beings. Okay, I do want to also talk about what are your standards now in your 30s versus like what were you looking for in your 20s? Like, how has that evolved over time?
Sure. So I've never used the phrase standards because I've never had a barometer by which if they didn't meet all of these quote standards, I wouldn't date them. I've always been like fairly flexible on that. I think that what I've changed or what has transitioned into my 30s is that I allow myself to be pursued, which I never used to do. I used to kind of be very much of the camp that if he's the one, it doesn't matter. I can text him, he can text me, I can ask us to go on a date, whatever. And I think that's where I'd like society to get, but I don't know that we're there yet. And I think that every time I've done that, it has been too much for the guy because we're just not there yet. Even with the right guys, sometimes they're like, whoa. So I've definitely in my 30s allowed myself to be pursued. And that would be a standard that I guess I'm upholding is that if I'm going to give you the space to pursue me and you don't pursue me, then you're not for me. And that's okay. And being clear about walking away or not walking away, it's not like some big dramatic thing, but being clear about not trying to force things in terms of like specific standards in a guy. I think it's become more important to me that he has passions and interests. And I don't think that was something that I was as thoughtful about in my 20s. But now I think about it like I want somebody who is fully whole as an individual, who has his own friend group, whose own passions and interests, a career, whatever it is that he is excited about. And if he's not excited about, he's looking towards ways to pivot. I don't want to be with someone who's consistently complaining about their job, doesn't have, interest or things to do with their time. Because if I go with my girlfriends away for a weekend, I don't want there to be a codependency there. I want us to both have independent lives and attributes that we use to make the relationship better, but that are separate and in and of themselves. I think that's the standard that I probably carried into my 30s that I cared less about in my 20s.
I love that. And it goes so closely to like my own journey of like, I mean, I got married when I was 25, so I was married in my 20s
Oh,
and,
wow.
yeah, I was really young and do not recommend. But I mean, I feel like we barely know ourselves until we're 30. You got to go through your
Yeah,
Saturn return to know who you are,
right.
right?
Oh, I could write a book about that. Dating men
Literally.
in their Saturn return. Like I now ask men, and I'm like, let's figure this one out. Okay, great, you've passed it. It's been 5 years. Great.
Yeah, exactly. I fell into the codependency trap because he was the first healthy guy that I was ever in a relationship with. And I
Yeah,
was like, oh my gosh, I thought I have to earn love. So I'm doing all these things to make sure that I don't lose my husband. Because I was in my 20s, I didn't know who I was and I wasn't like rooted and grounded in myself as a whole individual
right.
self. It's so important to have that. Like, so my husband and I actually lived in our own apartments for a year, and that story ended
Mhm.
up going viral in like New York Times and things like that. So, like,
Yeah,
our stories are really similar because we spoke our truth on the internet
yeah,
and we got a lot of hate for it and a lot of love.
yeah. Some people get it. Some people don't.
Exactly. It really gave me that time and the space to just choose who I want to become without the pressure of being a wife and all these things. And it's so important to have that time and that solitude for yourself, the single era, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like when you are single, how are you maintaining that sense of self while also and creating enough space to bring someone into your life?
When I got out of my last breakup, I got out of my last breakup in 2018. So it's literally been 5.5 years since I've been in a relationship. And the first year and a half was definitely like a healing journey. And then COVID hit. And only probably in the past 2 years have I been like actively putting myself out there and being like, okay, I'm ready. And I think that there's a lot of things that I am thankful that I did in that time. One of which was obviously therapy, one of which was like figuring out what I wanted in terms of long term goals. But I think that in terms of looking at men, every year on the last week of December, I write like a manifestation list for the next year. And it's like every single thing I can possibly think of. And I spent probably probably 2.5 years ago, I spent probably the first year I was like truly out there dating being like completely delusional. Like, and what I mean by this is I threw everything at the wall to see what stuck and what was for me and what was not. I went on dates with, guy who was a millionaire. I went on a date with a 21-year-old cowboy who lives in Montana. I kid you not, hired a spellcaster from San Diego and like did a love spell because I was like, what if that's the way? I ordered specialty herbs. Like I had a dating coach. I just kind of threw it all. I had crystals. I was all of it. I would go on walks and I'd like think about it. And I think what's really interesting about it is that was a delusional period in my life.
I mean, it
But what
sounds
I
fun.
it was super fun. But what I got from it was I started learning the things that tied the guys that I liked together. And I started chipping away at it. And every guy I was dating, I could feel it. This is weird to say out loud, but I could feel myself getting closer and closer. It was like I was chipping away at this like rock and being like, okay, that wasn't it. What about this? This wasn't it. And just chipping away to where in the past, probably 4 or 5 months, I've I said this on TikTok the other day, and it was like this wild thing. I went to church. I'm not a churchgoer. I was raised in the South. I go every now and again. I went to church, and the entire sermon was this idea that people pray to ask for things, but they should pray to listen, which is kind of the same thing as meditation, like clear your brain and see what, like, it's very similar.
Comes to you.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, see what comes to you. And it was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I'd started feeling at peace with like, I was chipping away at all these things I liked and didn't like in my dating and my single life or whatnot. And it was like this neon flashing light came across the front and it just said, he's coming over and over and over. And it was the most bizarre thing. I hadn't gone to church in like 5 years. And I came home and I was just like, I had this sense of peace where I was like, you're finally at a place where you're open to receive and like you're ready. And I feel like for the first time, I'm ready. And it feels really, really freaking like calming. So,
I believe every single thing that you're saying to like the core of my entire existence, because that is the work that I do with my clients, where I tell them that you have to see the patterns in your dating
yeah,
history and the kind of person that you're attracted to. And then you have to find the pattern of how does that connect with like the wounding that you have, your inner child wounding or your relationship with your parents or, the insecurities that you have within you. And then it's like targeted healing that you can do that really like when you sit and allow yourself to feel and release that completely and deeply and thoroughly, that's how you quantum leap and get closer and closer and closer to the life that you deeply desire. And
yeah,
it's all through your emotions because our
yeah,
emotions are energy in motion. It's all energetic. So I think that you were really ready. And I think you were ready to do whatever it took to pinpoint exactly what it is that is blocking you from
yeah,
calling in what you want. And now it's like you did the work and you deserve to be
yeah.
like rewarded for that.
But it's also like I got a sense of peace. Like it might not be next year, it might be in 10 years, but I, for some reason, it was almost like I shed this biological clock, this like ticking time bomb I had. And I was just like, I know he's going to come. I don't know when, I don't know in what way, but I like, there's not a drop of doubt that I have that I will meet my person. And because of that, I'm not willing to settle. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that people often tell me, because I've dated really good guys. I've thought about it and I've had gone back and forth about guys that I've dated in the past 5 years and been like, is he one? Is he not? What, yada, yada. But I've become really settled and grounded in what I'm looking for, such that a guy who is a good guy does not make him my guy. And being able to discern that and not come from this like scarcity mindset of he's the only good guy that's ever going to love me. He's not. Like he's just not. That's not how like the world works.
An important thing to remember is that the fact that you're even attracting these healthy men means that you're in alignment in the right direction, right? Like,
Yeah,
but that
it's a
doesn't
really
mean
good
that you have
point.
to settle for the first person. It's just the universe showing you, see, told you that there's good men out there. Like, I
Yeah,
think a lot of
it's like
women get stuck in
reaffirming your
this
beliefs.
mindset. Exactly. There's no such thing as like a happily ever after. People come into your life to teach you like lessons, and
Sure.
you'll know in your gut when you want to continue on and when it's time to let go. But a lot of us don't listen to our gut, right? And we're just like thinking with our head, like, oh, but what if there's no one else out there for me? I
Right.
should stay. I love that switch from the scarcity to the abundance mindset when it comes to dating because it's so important. But then it's like, everything that is sacred and good also has the opposite end of it
Yeah.
being toxic, like you said earlier about the men that are swiping, and they're like, there's always better out there. So why, like, it's the
Why
second things are
settle?
hard. It's like there's
Yep.
like exactly when you have that abundance mindset. So how do you balance that?
I think I've never felt that way about dating. I can imagine men do. I've never felt that way. Like, I've always felt like I unfortunately always put the man that I'm interested in on a pedestal. And that's something I've really had to work on is like taking them off that pedestal. So I've never thought that there was going to be another better version because I've always been like, he's it. So that's been a big lesson for me. But I do think that in general, there's a difference between how men and women treat dating, and that as a woman, we have to learn different lessons from men in order to get to that same kind of ready place. And so I think for men, their lesson is that it's not settling, it's treating every single opportunity for the lesson you're going to learn. Date the girl who maybe doesn't check off all your boxes and maybe be surprised. Maybe learn the lesson so that you come into your next relationship in a healthier mindset. Like, take those opportunities and see what transpires from it. And I think for women, it's date without expectation. And again, we should both sexes should be learning how to date. We don't know how to date. And it's like take these times, 3 month, 4 month, 5 month situationships, dating, whatever, and learn everything you can from it. It doesn't have to be about the end goal. And I think we're so end goal focused that what's the phrase, miss the forest for the trees, that we're, you know what I mean? And that's the lesson I'm trying to learn.
Is like a false sense of security that is painted to
Yeah.
us in like movies, because movies end when it's a happily ever after and all these things, right? And
Right.
it's like, girl, I've been married for 9 years and there is no such thing as a happily ever after. There are moments of
Right.
pure fucking bliss
Right.
and months of like, oh my God, I am the luckiest human being on this planet. How is this real? And then
Yeah.
a week later, it's like, oh my gosh, I want to fucking kill you. Like I need to like run away from this whole
Right.
situation. It's all a balance, right? It's the dichotomy of life and like ebbs and flowing and like learning and like allowing yourself to know. And like my anxiety used to get so bad of like, oh my gosh, what if I'm with the wrong person? Like I'm married, what do I do? And now understanding that it's a choice that I get to make every single day. Whether I love him or I hate him, I choose him. And that gives me so much peace
Yeah.
because it's like the choice is mine. I'm not stuck in the situation. If I really am unhappy and if I'm truly like not in it, just leave. There's no need to like suffer, right? And like
Yeah.
happily ever after makes people think that this is it. This is my one true love and I'm never going to have love again if I leave. And I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, like this isn't even love. You're not even happy. Like please, like trust me
Right.
that there is better love out there that is
Right.
not going to make you feel this way."
Well, it's like my parents got divorced when I was 30, and they've been together for 33 years. And I think they still love each other and have, like, very deep feelings for each other. And they're both in relationships again. It was such a weird lesson to me because it was like, oh, just because you're married does not mean it's forever, right? Like, we all hope it is. We all think maybe it is. But the idea that I'm going to be who I am today and I'm going to meet a man who he is today. And in 25, 30 years, we're both going to have grown, which I hope we both grown, right, as individuals. And the people we've grown into are going to be as connected or more connected than they were when they fell in love and got married. That just file like the idea of that happening, like I'd be the luckiest person in the world if that happened. The odds are not in your favor that you both grow into a way that is, just as connected. That's work.
Exactly. It's relationship work. And I think
Yeah.
that, even if you feel like you're in a very happy, committed relationship and things are fine, it is so important to have weekly check-ins because we
Yes.
are humans that are ever evolving and ever growing and ever
Right.
changing and ever being curious about who we want to be and what we want to do and what we're ready to let go of and who we want to
Yeah.
become. And it's
Yeah.
like allowing that space in your relationship every single week or month or year, whatever that looks like for you guys, and being like, hey, let's just do a check-in and make sure that we are growing in the same direction
Okay.
so
Yeah.
that we are still aligned and
Yeah.
we don't just wake up one day 10 years down the road and be like,
How do we get there?
what just happened? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's to your point that like people have this idea that like once they get married, like that's the golden ticket, like all their problems are figured out. And it's like, no, you'll just transfer that energy somewhere else. Maybe it's your career, maybe it's, now you've got marital problems, whatever it is, there's always going to be things that you're working at, and there's no band-aid to it. You've got to continue doing the work.
Yeah, exactly. There's no end to the healing journey, but the glimmer
Right?
of it all is that, now you have the tools and resources so that when it does come up, you know exactly what you need in order to like learn the
Yeah.
lesson, integrate it, and keep
Yeah.
going on your like instead of like a wound taking me like freaking, a year to process. Now I'm like, okay, a week. Like here we go. Let's go.
Well, when it's so funny when a guy like cancels on a date with me now or ghosts me or I don't hear from him, for the first time and recently, I'm like, okay, like that's okay. That's not about me. That's about them and whatever's going on in their life. And I don't have to draw in that energy. I don't have to let my ego, get hurt. I don't have to feel bad about myself or whatever. And that took a hell of a lot of work to get to that point because it used to be if a guy ghosted me, that's me. What's wrong with me? Why doesn't he like me? And it's like only very recently, and that was just step one, right? And then you've got to go from that to I'm deserving, but I'm going to put in the work to this, like there's so many lessons along the path.
And then the I'm worthy comes after all that when you
Yeah.
have to, like, so where I'm at in my journey right now is
Yeah.
like, my husband just offered, he's like, hey, let me cover, he just got like this huge raise, right? And he's like, babe, I just want to cover the house bills. I don't want you to worry about it. Like, I want you to just focus on your career and do the
Yeah.
things that you want to do without the pressure. That took me months to process,
To
right?
come
Because
through.
I
Yeah.
got triggered. I was like, I don't need to rely on you financially. Like, I never want to feel like I am stuck or anything, right? It was just these like
Yeah.
limiting beliefs that I had because of my parents and their situation of my mom, like relying on my dad financially and all this stuff, where I was just like, me allowing him to pay for the house bills doesn't mean that I can't afford my house bills or if I like needed to leave. You know what I
Right.
mean? Learning to receive from my man is only going to allow him to receive more blessings in his own life. And I swear, like the
Yeah.
second I surrendered to be like, okay, I'm okay with this, like I feel good with this in my nervous system, he got another job that is like an incredible opportunity that he's been like wanting forever.
Right.
Like it's so energetic, all of this work. So I
Yeah.
always say like choose someone that you want to play the game with, not someone that you want to play against.
Right.
Like if
Right.
you're in the power struggle where you're like competing against each other, hey, like, you know what though, I'm not gonna judge, like if that's what turns you on in bed, like go for it. But
Right.
like I want a partner and a teammate to play the game of life with.
Yeah, 1000%. And it's so interesting that you bring up the money thing because that's been the hardest for me. My mom in the divorce, money was such an issue because she hadn't worked. She'd raised kids, right? And so it was so ingrained in my head that I never should rely on a man. Never should need a man because I didn't, because if we get divorced, like I have to be able to take care of myself. And if I leave my career, and it's just been beat over, beat over. But you're so right that like I can continue my career and also allow myself to be provided for, which is a huge struggle to let go of that control, especially as women who are gaining more kind of traction in the workspace. Yeah, and independence. Like having that balance between your masculine and feminine energy and what you've been like. I've been single for 5.5 years. I've done it all by myself. I now date guys sometimes and I'm like, I don't know how to like lean back. And that is a whole nother bag of learning curves.
Yeah, I think that the minute you choose to spend the rest of your life together and you make that commitment, that's when the work begins of stepping into your feminine energy, right? And like allowing yourself to learn how to balance that yin and yang within. That's when the real work begins, truly. Like, I think the dating part is just like, I don't know why people have such a hard time. And it's like, if you feel it, go for it. If not,
Right.
like, leave. Honesty, vulnerability, just put it all out there. Show your authentic self, unmasked, so you can know who's for you and who's not for you.
Yeah.
But of course, I understand that like anxiety is a very real thing. But it
Yeah, it's
sounds like
also,
you've healed your anxiety, which is insane.
yeah, I've done a lot of work on that and it's still there. Don't get me wrong, it's still there. Like yesterday, I had an anxious spiral and I was spiraling about God knows what. Sometimes you don't even know, right? I think that I'm just as anxious as I was, but I'm a lot more open about it. And I think that helps being open about it. And I also think that I do things now. Like I didn't, like I said, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I didn't leave my house yesterday. I was like, you're not in a good place. You're spiraling. You need to deep clean, do laundry, hang out with your dog, read a book. Like you need to do these things to ground yourself back to a good place before the week starts. Whereas 5 years ago, if I was in that place, I would have like had a Sunday fun day and just like gotten drunk with my friends at brunch and not addressed it. Or I would have texted a whole bunch of guys trying to get attention and like validation. And not to say that there's anything wrong with going out and having a fun brunch. I still do that. But I was doing those things as a coping mechanism for my anxiety. And I think that's the difference is that now I do it because it's a fun thing, on occasion, not because I'm not doing it to cover up from the fact that I'm spiraling about the fact that I haven't heard from a guy in 3 days. I mean, I used to have the worst problems texting exes and not like exes because the past 5 years, like I said, I'm in a relationship, like ex situationships, guys I dated, is that I would get into this place of like lonely mentality and I would text, I'm not kidding you, 30 guys one night. I would the exact same thing, copy and pasted, just to get the like dopamine hit of them responding.
Validation.
Yeah, I didn't want to see them. I didn't want a relationship with them. We had ended. There were reasons we'd ended. I knew all of that. And this past year, I was like, you're 35. You're not going to do that anymore. And like, that sounds insane to say out loud, but I legitimately remember I would copy paste every single man in my phone book just for that like dopamine high. And that took a lot of work to be like, what is going on here, Eve? What are you needing that you're not getting? What are you not working on? Like, this is psychotic behavior. Not that I was saying anything like exceptionally forward.
It's so real. Like the fact that you're on here sharing this online and being so radically honest about it, it's so fucking real. And
I think other people do this.
I literally have to take phones away from my girlfriends when we're out and
Yeah,
being like, babe, like, it's okay. Like, you don't need to be texting these people
right,
right now. It's
right.
so normal. It happens because of the anxiety or because you're drunk and you're just like lonely and you're like feeling like you need that sense of control in the moment. Literally, our sad little inner child, right? So it's
Yeah.
like
Just
when
like, hi,
you can't.
remember me?
Yeah, and it's like you can't like demonize it to go away. You can't say it's a psychotic episode or
No,
anything like that because you have
sure.
to love your way to healing, right? Like I love that you have been able to see that now and be like and still admit it and share it online. It's like you're not shaming and hiding the past version of you even though you are now, working towards it, moving past it. And I think that is how you truly heal, like sustainably.
I think that people who, I mean, there might be exceptions, but I think that people who say they've never gotten lonely and texted an ex are probably lying. I think that people who say, or at least like we all have our own ways of coping. And I think for me, it was like
Not like a text to an ex, it's like a thirst trap online or whatever,
right,
right?
right. Or they're
It's
stalking that
something.
person's new friend or whatever, right? It's natural, like it's very natural, but there are reasons we're doing it. And you have to find healthier coping mechanisms and it can't become a pattern. For me, it became a pattern. For me, it was like, I would get lonely. I would text everyone and I wouldn't even respond after that. I didn't care to have a conversation. I just wanted to know that they were going to respond back. Like that for me was like, okay, it's okay. You're single, but if you wanted to have a conversation with them, you could. That was all it was. And it
Like, you're
was
not actually as
so
lonely as you think you are. That is what you're doing in that
right,
moment.
right.
Yeah.
And it's just a
Which is so
Band-Aid because
normal.
I would wake morning like being like, I don't want this person. Like I did not, there was a reason we ended things, whatever it was. And yeah, it took me a really long time to be like, okay, what can you do? And I remember the other night I went out with my girlfriend and we had a night and we went to like two or three different places and I had a lot of martinis. And I remember the next morning waking up and texting her and being like, I did not text a single guy. And I was so proud of myself. I was like, not a one. I was like, not even a guy friend. And she was like, I'm so proud of you. And I was like, that is gross comparatively. And I didn't even want to. I was so happy just being with her. And she made this comment to me. She was like, in the past year, I see when you go out, like, yeah, you talk to guys, you flirt with guys, whatever, but you're not like hunting. You're not going out like, who's here? Who can I talk to? And that's a change in my like chasing desperate energy and just being like, I'm not having a good time. If I meet someone, I meet someone. But again, that took a lot of work because it used to be I would other things that I'm admitting out loud, I would see going out in terms of if I didn't meet a guy, I had wasted money on drinks, time on pursuing my career or hobbies, calories on alcohol that I didn't need, and, a new outfit or whatever. Like it was a waste. And I would calculate in my head, you drank three drinks that were this many calories that you didn't need. If you'd been at home, you wouldn't have drank them. And they cost $15, $20 a pop. That's $60 you didn't need. And that's 4 hours you could have been working on your hobbies, working on your career, whatever that you just threw in the trash because you didn't meet anyone. And that was the pressure and the place my mind went before I went out. And like, what? It's going out is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be like a math equation into like what you got out and what you put out. Yeah, like, but that's how I calculated it. And I would wake up on Sunday and it wasn't just anxiety. It was like, you spent $75, you wasted 4 hours, and you ate 700 calories you didn't need. Like, bad Eve. Like, so that's been a whole journey.
Crazy how much we punish ourselves over like things that we're just allowed to do to have fun, right?
Yeah,
Like it reminds me of like, I love to go on trips alone, but like I feel so guilty when I'm spending money that like can be spent on on like our couple
right,
trips together.
right.
And when I'm at these places, I have to force myself, not force, but like process the thought like of like
Yeah,
feeling guilty and being like, let me make the most of this experience so that it's worth the
worth
money,
it. Yep.
right? And it's like all this pressure, and then I'm not even having fun.
Because you're worried about that. Yeah, no, my best
Yeah.
friend's married and she consistently like she doesn't want to go on trips without him. And she's consistently like worried about these things and thinking about it. And I'm constantly like trying to explain to her that there's, a benefit to going on these
Huge
trips
benefit. It is the
alone,
most
right?
soul fulfilling shit
Yeah.
ever.
I mean, I do it all the time, but in a relationship, I can imagine it's a whole, it's a different mindset. Like for me, I'm like, I would love to have the opportunity to go with somebody and experience it because it's a different lesson you learn, right? The lesson you learn about compromise. You can't just wake up whenever you want and do whatever you want on vacation. You have to think about them because I'm used to going and like, I can do whatever I want. And that's a totally new shift that I've got to make.
My husband and I backpacked the world for a year, and holy shit, did it bring up so much shit in our relationship. And like, just like, oh my God, you learn so much about someone when you travel with them.
Yeah.
And like, while we were dating, we went on like 4 trips in 1 year. And like, that's also why I feel like it was so much easier for us to know that like we could
Right.
make it work. I told you that we were casually dating for 8 months, but then 4 months after that we got married. So like he was like, when I know. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
like, okay. I was like, I just got to be your girlfriend and now I have to be your fiance. This is a little much.
That's amazing. I kind of love that
But it's a
though.
big I know he's crazy. But it's nice because like we got to travel and really know each other. I always tell people
Yeah.
like you have to travel with the person that you are interested in to see their true colors during
Yeah,
high
like what are
stress
they like?
situations. Yes.
1000%. If you can't travel with them, for me that would be such a deal breaker because like I I want to be with somebody who, when shit hits the fan, like remains calm, doesn't freak out, doesn't make it worse. Like, because that's just going to hit the fan when you have kids. It's going to hit the fan when somebody close to you passes away. Like, there's going to be so many other obstacles thrown in your way. Like, travel is like a baby version of some of that.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking of someone that remains calm, I guess, how do you know when you're dating someone that they are right for you versus wrong for you? Like, what are some traits that you pick
Ooh,
up on?
I've been working a lot on this in therapy. I have often been told that I'm too much. I've often been told that my personality is too much, that I dated a guy for a really long time who would, when I was in public, when I was like at a wedding or whatever talking, he would distance himself from me because the personality that I had, he was almost in competition with it. Like, he was loud and extroverted, and I could be loud and extroverted. And so he didn't support it. He kind of wanted to distance and walk away because it was like if I shone bright, then he felt like he was being dimmed or whatnot. Um, and I've often felt, even just coming from the South, like my background's in the South, and that's where I was raised, I've often felt like, I'm not the demure girl that you see on the movies from like Sweet Home Alabama or whatnot. And so finding a guy who embraces that about me has been the most important thing, who doesn't need to like diminish my personality, who's not embarrassed if I'm loud or, boisterous or talk a lot or, any of those things. Because
Authentically you, right?
yeah, and I'm 5'10", so I'm just like a big presence in general. And so like finding a guy who embraces that about me and sees it as like the most beautiful thing about me rather than trying to minimize it is something that I've been striving to find in the partners that I date.
I love that. It's so important. And I actually realized on my journey that I was dimming my own light, thinking that my
Yeah,
husband wouldn't like this
like
because
it.
of things that we've been taught as women growing
Yep,
up. And then during my healing journey and things will come up, I'll be like, oh, I can't post whatever I want on social media and speak my truth on social media because he may get offended or he may feel some sort of way. And then I started having these conversations with him. I was like, hey, babe, like this is really bothering me. I really feel like I need to share this. And like, it may not paint you in the best light. Is that okay? And he's like, of course. He's like, you got to
yeah,
do what you got to do. Your like,
right,
your purpose here is to empower women to speak their truth. That starts with you. And I
yeah,
was like, damn, like so much of what we think our partners won't like is in our own heads. And we need to just get out of our heads, ask, and then allow them to surprise you.
yeah. And if they don't like it, then that's more information you have, right? And then maybe they're not my person, especially like in the dating space for me. If I'm my authentic self, then I learn a lot quicker if they like it than if I hid behind some like facade for 6 months.
And then there's also times where he's like, oh, I don't know about that. And then you can have a discussion and be like,
Yeah,
oh, okay, well, this is my point of view. What's blocking you? And then you learn more
sure,
about each other and you're like,
sure.
oh, okay, that's where he's coming from. Then you can make a choice together of like what is the best way to move forward and co-create the life that you're building together and not make it just all about you and all about
Right.
them and learn how to like balance that without compromise. I think
Yeah.
compromise is like a word that comes up a lot in relationships, but I would like to reframe that and be like, it's not about you just compromising sometimes and them compromising sometimes to make it work. It really is about voicing why you believe what you believe,
Yeah.
hearing them why they believe what they believe, and then finding a new path forward, you know?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be one. It's not that like this week we go where you want to eat for dinner and next week we go where I want. That in my mind is just taking turns. That's not like compromise. You have to have the discussions and they're going to be hard. That's why it's a compromise. If it's not hard, they say, so I do a lot of negotiation in my like job as a lawyer, right? And they always say that like for a mediator, because we go to mediation a lot, that the perfect settlement is one where nobody's happy. And that's how I think about compromise. If you're just picking somebody's choice over the other, you're not compromising. Like a true compromise, realistically, nobody's happy, but nobody's mad either, you know, like, because you talk through it. And that's, I think, harder.
Oh, relationships are such a dance. So much Amazing. This has been so fun, and thank you so
Yeah,
much for coming on the show. What are some things that you like to share about what you're working on with the Arrow or personally with my
sure.
audience?
So basically the bounty that I put out in July, basically saying that I would pay somebody $5,000 if they introduced me to my husband. I had a tech founder reach out to me after that and say to me, I think this is a great idea. I would love it. I would pay to meet my future person. Matchmaking is unfortunately a little bit outdated these days because you pay $10,000 to a matchmaker and there's no guarantees that you get matched with anybody you like. They just send you on dates, right? The dating apps have all the issues we've discussed. And he was like, I would love to set a bounty for myself, but I don't have kind of the social media presence that you do that it would have a broader audience. And he was like, can we create this for just any and everybody? Basically making like a LinkedIn for dating, economizing it so that, your best friend, who's my best friend is a stay-at-home mom who, well, she has a job, but she's at home with her kid a lot too. And, she knows people that are single, but she doesn't have any incentive to connect them. She doesn't have any reason to think, what to do. Could we create a way to economize it so that we're all looking at our networks and maximizing those opportunities? Everybody wants to be introduced to a friend of a friend, but nobody's like realistically doing it anymore. So the Arrow kind of aims to create that platform. You can sign up as a member or a matchmaker, and then from that, you are as a matchmaker, you can match people. You can look at their profiles and you can say, "Oh, I have a friend in LA who I think would be a great match," and you can connect them. And if they end up getting in a relationship, getting engaged, getting married, what have you, you get basically like a finder's fee for it. And if they don't, if nothing happens, no one pays, then there's like kind of no harm, no foul. So we're trying to kind of economize people's networks for love, not just for jobs. Like if I had an open job at my law firm and I knew a friend who was looking, I would suggest it to her, right? So why aren't we doing that more in the love space? So that's what I'm working on alongside my TikTok, which I just basically talk about honest stories about my dating and the single journey, and along with being a lawyer. That's kind of my life in a nutshell currently.
I love it. A multifaceted woman having multifaceted thought processes to make dating work. I love it.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for coming on, and I am excited to follow you on your journey and rooting
yes,
for you to find true
thank
love.
you. Anyone, let me know.
I will.